that part worked. Can I now swap over to Keynote and have Keynote be nice to me? It can, yay. All right, thanks. That's a very tough act to follow. I actually hadn't intended to cover a lot of the same ground that Andrew was going to cover. That's a happy coincidence. I did want to deliver some of the same messages that Andrew was in his so much more eloquent and charming accent way than I am capable of. But I think we're basically on the same page, right? I'm going to do a little bit differently in how I think about some of this stuff. But I wanted to break up my presentation, which was effectively, to reframe what I was going to say, my journey through those 5 stages is basically what I was going to talk about. But the message that I wanted to put in there around how I see technology, I'm going to do up front. And I'm not going to be as nice about it. I'm going to be a little bit more deliberately provocative, challenging in how we do this thing. If I get thrown down at the pub, great, we'll see how it goes. So I don't normally give a warning at the start of my presentations, but I'm just going to put it out there. I am aiming to challenge the way you think about this sort of stuff. So I do want to put then that, as Andrew said, what follows is my opinion of the industry. It's not a fact. Like, it's just how I see it after having gone through that 5-stage journey, right? But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background, which I think hopefully will help explain how I got to where I got to. So, I actually pulled it out. I was searching in my storage cage for something else, and I opened a box, and I'm like, oh, great, like I can use this. It was. I don't even know what's a backup of. I haven't looked at that. I don't even think I have a CD-ROM anymore. How am I going to check out what's on the backup disk? But I'll figure it out. So when I first got into computing, my first computer was a 386 SX. I was probably around 9 or 10 when I got that, so early 90s sort of thing. And I don't remember too much about it, but I do remember the upgrade to the 486 SX, DX66. Like that was my best birthday ever I think I've had. And for me, that was the entire reason that I had the computer. Games. All of the different games that I wanted to play. And to be able to play those games, well, you couldn't just plug it in now or go off the Steam store and click it and plays and it opens. You had to know DOS. You had to know Windows 3.1. When you upgraded to Windows 95, you needed to figure all of that out. Installing drivers, managing storage, because, games came on a floppy disk that you shared with your friends, and then you got to overwrite the floppy disk. But there wasn't enough for all of your save files, so you had to manage all of that. That's what I learned. Like, learning how to use the computer was just a tool for me to be able to play the games. The games was what I was there for. Learning how to use the computer was just a way to get there. I did the same thing when I taught myself to code. I was seeing stuff on the internet. I wanted to be able to share things that I was doing, talk about games, everything else. So I learned PHP to be able to publish online to do that. So writing code was the vehicle that I used to achieve a goal, to solve a problem that I had. Apologies for those online who just got an earful of static. That's a bit better. But it was the computer, DOS, Windows, all of that sort of stuff was the tool to get to the end goal. Playing games, sharing stuff online, all of that sort of stuff. I then went through a very abstract and interesting career path. I was lucky enough to get hired at a startup straight out of high school when I was 18. So I went and lived all expenses paid for 12 months in Cape Town, working on what was Dropbox 10 years before Dropbox was actually a thing. It never would have worked. That's not the point. But it was more like a vacation than it was a job. I came back to country New South Wales, where I was born, in Dubbo. No software jobs there, so couldn't keep building code. Had to go back into general IT. I answered phones, did help desk. It was country New South Wales, so a lot of farmers, they would bring their PCs and it would either be full of viruses or full of dust or both. So it was either air compressor was the tool or antiviral software, and that was pretty much what I did. I fortunately leveraged some Linux experience to go and work for an ISP. There was only one ISP in town and they did satellite reselling. So I got to manage their Linux service for a bit, and through them I taught myself Cisco and networking and everything else because I had that opportunity to do that. Fortunately, I got out of country New South Wales and moved to Melbourne. Did some PHP work here off the bat because I realized that I enjoy building things way more than I enjoy fixing things. Managed to leverage my way into my first iOS role, which was at Yarra Trams, doing the very first tram tracker app back in the day. Again, just using to get to where I wanted to go. Since then, I bounced around. When AWS came along, I was working for a digital agency, and they brought me in to solve a core data threading issue. And they had a 6-month contract for that, and I solved it in the first 3 days, because all I did was add some assertions and some logging, and I'm like, you're not on the same thread from back there, fix it pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So for the rest of that contract, they're like, well, we've got this AWS stuff, like, can you help us out with that? I'm like, okay, sure. And I've bounced around between those since then. Mostly I do iOS these days. I don't remember what my next slide is and whether I need to lead into it or not. What does that say? Right, yeah. So the point of this long-winded journey to tell you about myself is that I've learned a bunch of tools along the way to solve problems that I was given, right? Software, writing code, as you physically typing code, is just one of those tools that I use to solve a problem that I've been asked to solve. And now we get into the spicy bits. Nobody pays you to write code. As much as we want it to be the truth, nobody pays us to write code. We're paid to solve a problem. Code is just a way to solve a problem. Only one photo. I thought it was going to be way more spicy than that. It's got to go to quotas, absolutely. Doesn't matter where you work, right? The CEO of your company, board of directors if you're a big company, the founder of a startup, don't come in and say, I've got a bucket of money, I need to hire some coders. For some reason, I keep using banking analogies. I don't know why I use banking analogies. But the CEO of a bank doesn't go, I need to hire coders. They think in terms of problems. As a bank, I want people to deposit their money with us so that I can then lend that out to other people and make interest payments on it, and then I can make money. But having bank tellers is expensive, branches are expensive, and it's 2026. People want to be able to self-service their stuff on their phone without having to talk to somebody. That's my problem statement. They give that to their execs and they make it their execs problem, who then kick it down the chain to their managers, whoever it might be. Somebody looks in there and goes, well, how are we going to solve this? If they've never done this before, if this is new for them, they bring in some consultants, very expensive consultants, who then charge them $15 million to be told, well, you need an app. They don't tell you what kind of app. Maybe they'll charge you extra to tell you what kind of app. They also come in and say, well, we can build this for you, $200 million. No problem, easy. And your CEO comes back and goes, well, okay, we understand the problem now. Somebody fix it. Here is a person in the right division who will build a team to fix it. They then, hire somebody to start a team. That person then looks at it and goes, well, if you want to be an app, you've got to be in the App Store. We can have a web app that is wrapped in a native app, put on the App Store. We could do React Native, we could do native, fully native, whatever they want. They present it all back up to the CEO, you get a stamp, you get a budget. CEO says, great, you've got $50 million to deliver this. We're still not talking about code. Nowhere in this we've spoken about code at all. That person that was hired to run that project then looks in and goes, well, we want to do native, all of that sort of stuff. In order to do that, I'm going to need some iOS engineers. I'm going to need some Android engineers, and we're going to need to hire those people. That person cares about people that can write code. But that person is spending the CEO's money that he was given. The person that's paying for the thing just wants their problem solved. They don't care about the code that actually comes out of that, right? So, if you... I'm going to skip that one because that doesn't make sense now. So you've hired your coders, right? They care about the code. CEO doesn't care about the code. Get through there. So I don't see myself, even though I put that on LinkedIn as a software engineer. Right? That's just how I'm marketing myself today. But that's not how I see myself. My job and the thing that I get paid to do is to solve problems. To bring it back to what Andrew was talking about, it's that 10%. It's always been about that 10%. The writing code is just a way for me to do that 10%, to sell that 10%. I think to Pete, to your question, your GitHub corpus that you then take into an interview. Yes, it's code, but it's code you use to solve a problem. Still valuable. You solve the problem. Here is the evidence I solved the problem. And then you talk about how you solved the problem. But it's all about solving problems. It's not about the code. It's never been about the code. Okay. So that was my provocative part over. For the rest of this, see how long we've got in terms of time, is to talk about my journey. So to frame it in what Andrew said, I'm going to skip pretty much directly from how I got from denial straight to acceptance. Didn't actually happen that way in real life, but what I'm going to talk about is the way I used Claude and the things that I built with Claude to help me learn how to use the tool, to leverage it and to get the way through. No point reading that. That's just a photo I found, a stock photo I found on the internet. It doesn't mean anything at all. So 12 months or so, give or take, I was in denial. I said here, I didn't really get it. I didn't see the value of it. I was in denial. You know, having a chatbot interface, even if it was embedded in your IDE, was still much slower to me to, you know, write a prompt that worked, get something valuable out of it, copy paste it into what I was trying to do. Or if you're lucky enough that it wrote straight in, great. But it was still faster for me to just do it myself. Still faster for me to know the problem, understand the problem, write the code to fix the problem, move on. Obviously, you know, that's moved a long way in the past 12 months, but that's where I was 12 months ago. I only learn, and which comes back to your last slide, Andrew, by doing stuff, making mistakes, trying it. I can't watch YouTube videos and pick something up. I can't read blog posts and pick it up, although I'd much rather a blog post over a YouTube video. Just can't. Don't have the patience for 20 minutes of how to use Claude. It doesn't work. So I have to try it myself, figure out what went wrong, fix it, keep going. So I needed in order for me to really get my head around how to use Claude, I needed a project that I could throw it at, understand how it worked, and go from there. And fortunately, capitalism came to the rescue on this one, because one SaaS service that I was using for something decided, all right, we're going to raise our prices by $40 a month. And I'm like, well, I'm using 10% of your product, and now you want me to pay $40 a month extra for it. Can I just spend that $40 on a Claude Pro subscription for a month, get it to try and solve the problem for me? And it did. Something that helped me a lot was the brainstorming superpower, and actually, you know, iterating on specs, going through the development cycle, figuring out actually the tools can do a lot of the work for you. It can ask you the right question. It can help you get a spec, review the spec, approve the spec, move on to the next phase and on to the next phase. For reasons that I didn't ask it, it chose to do this in Python. I didn't tell it to do it in Swift or in something that I could do. I just let it go with what it thought was the most appropriate tool for the job. Now I can read Python, but unless I've got a syntax website open next to me, I can't really write Python. It would take me a long time to write Python. But it didn't really matter, right? The thing that I cared about was that it worked and that I could save myself $40 a month. That's what I cared about. But it failed. First run was terrible. We tried again, I refined my prompt, we tried again, didn't work. That moment for me was like, oh, this is how you hold Claude Code. Was instead of letting it run and then me copy pasting errors back into Claude and figuring it out, I was like, well, Claude, you run that. Read the error that comes out, fix it. Keep iterating until you get it right. We added a dry run mode, and then it just kept iterating on dry run mode until it solved, as far as it could see, all of the bugs that were there when it tried to run. I ran it properly the first time, and it worked great the first time. some code that I'd never read, never written, worked. I was measuring it by its output, not by the quality of what was in a text file at the end of the day. Now, there were a bunch of stuff that went wrong. There were a bunch of edge cases once we actually got into doing it properly. It had made very thin decisions around error handling. If I had written all of that code as I went, I would have caught that stuff. Because you write an expression, you think about the expression, you're like, okay, where's the way this could fail? All of that sort of stuff. But when you're thinking at a prompt level, you've got to be more explicit about that. There's different ways of holding the tool, but it's a different outcome at the end, or it's the same outcome at the end. Next property. Never read it. Don't need to read it. It's an internal tool just for me, right? It's not going into production. It's not going to be on anybody's devices. It's a tool that I use at home. Saves me some money, and I'd stop paying for that SaaS product entirely. So it's not only did I save the $40, I saved more than $40. $40 of them that was reinvested into a Claude subscription, but that's just the beginning of the problem. It really is. Yes, so every time that I'd tried to use the tools previously, I figured out by having a project that I could work on, it wasn't that the tools were bad. The tools were okay. It was that I was holding the tools wrong. I didn't understand the tools correctly. And the output I was getting from not holding the tools correctly, I was looking at it and going, well, I could do that better myself. I did 2 slides in one. That was pretty good. Next project I gave it was AWS dropped a billing MCP to help Claude speak AWS and interpret AWS bills. And ever since I had been using AWS, I've always had something running. And it got up to, as you can see there, this is in US dollars, about $130 a month at peak. I had done some stuff before this, so it was probably around $70 or $80 a month normally. Before this one, you only have 12 months worth of data in the history graph thing. But I gave that to Claude and I said, good, tell me about my AWS spend. And it did. It broke it down, all of the stuff that I could have got from the website, it explained to me. And then I'm like, well, here's an AWS CLI with a read-only configured token. Go and find out what all this stuff is. Because I've had stuff in there for a decade almost that I had no idea what a lot of it was, that I was still paying for. It went and pulled access logs for buckets, for other things. It's gone dependency graphs for this service uses this service, is configured over here. The IAM roles are over there. And it came back with me a list of things that said, well, you haven't used this in 18 months. You haven't used this in 3 years. And it's like, well, we can save us a bucket of money. And you can see this happened at the end of December, where I got rid of all of the other services because it had done that dependency analysis and said, well, you're not using all of this stuff. You're paying for it, but you're not using it. And now the only thing that's really left, aside from a couple of little bits, is my S3 buckets, so my backups. So it saved me around $95 overall, which then my brain's like, well, the Claude Max 5X is, so it's like $100. Spoiler alert, I'm now on the 20X, and I actually use it to the point where I would be well over the 5X limit. Next project that I tackled, home automation stuff. I have, since before COVID, I think, or around COVID, had at least smart light bulbs in every room in my house. These are the downlight ones, and everybody knows modern downlights just have a normal plug on them, so you just pop the old ones out, pop new ones in. Officially, an electrician's supposed to do that, and hopefully nobody's watching this stream that's going to get me in trouble. But it's easy, right? And in being in a Hue ecosystem, I grab some motion sensors and stuff, so my hallway has a motion sensor, my stairwell has a motion sensor, and my outdoor light, my front porch, has a motion sensor. And because I like playing with things, I've got my little home Linux server. I installed Home Assistant on there, and I fed all of this stuff into Home Assistant. And I looked at it, and I'm like, wow, look at all this data. It's got charts and stuff, and I can see what this is going on. you know, the UX is terrible. And I didn't really know what I could do with all of the data, but I've had data for like 8 years worth of data in there at that point, maybe closer to 5 years. And my wife is wonderfully tech savvy, but she doesn't have the patience or the desire to go and learn Home Assistant or, you know, whatever else, like Homebridge and other things that I'd installed to manage all of this stuff. So she mostly ignored it. We had Siri set up to turn lights on and off, and the motion sensors worked, and she didn't want to know anything about the rest of it. Fair enough. But I had all this data, I wanted to do something with it, and I wanted to make it especially easier for if something goes wrong, for Sarah to figure out what went wrong. So I got Claude to build me a little home intranet. Yes, we call our house the Goose House. That's just a long-standing thing now. It has links to all of our internal things that run. You know, we've got server status, so all the containers that are running on there, they report health to Uptime Kuma, which I then render there. Media stuff, climate stuff, weather stuff, network stuff, energy stuff. I'll get into those in a little bit more detail in the next one. So this is kind of what I really wanted. I wanted an interactive map of my house, or my townhouse, that had all of the sensors illustrated. You could interact with it. So you can choose, this one has chosen the bedroom. There's 2 lights in the bedroom. Bedroom climate controls, just a Sensibo IR remote that points at the thing itself, and some media stuff at the bottom. This was kind of what I had in mind. This is what I really wanted. And you can change office rooms. So you can see, this is a screenshot. So at the time, lights were on in the hallway and the living room, because I just wanted to visualize all my sensors and all my data and everything else. We took it a step further, because of course we did. We, yes. We'll keep saying that. All my temperature sensors around the house, because the Hue motion sensors also have a temperature sensor in them, and the Sensibos does as well. Again, the same climate control stuff. Network stats. You know, if my internet goes down, we'll know. Speed tests, because things aren't reliable and they just want it anyway. I pulled up an integration with my energy company to pull down prices and usage. So I get that as a daily dump from them, can visualize what that looks like. And I attempted to get Claude to tell me how much I could save by shifting my usage, and it turns out not a lot, which is disappointing, very disappointing. But it also says that I could just save money by using less, right? So that's a thing. And then, because of course I had to, every developer in Melbourne wants to build 2 things: a public transport app, I'd done that, and a weather app. So I built a weather app, and it's beautiful. And it does that thing that Pocket Weather used to do, connecting the reels with the forecast by adjusting things around. Looks a lot better when it's halfway through the day. And you can click on all of those and deep dive in for the last, I think, 18 months worth of data, and it's just got everything. And I actually use that more often than I will pull up a weather app now, just because it's there. And then the end bit, I haven't read any of this code either. Same thing. I asked Claude for a modern React app. I wanted it to be responsive, so supports mobile and web, desktop rather. I told it what I wanted to do to pull from Home Assistant, and then everything else that I wanted to put in there. And then, because I'd learnt my lesson the previous time, I treated this, even though it was a little home project, as I would have if I was doing it with the team. We started high, we just scaffolded a basic website, we got our theme correct, we got our bits and pieces, and then we started bolting on. Session by session, it got bolted on. And it probably took about 3 days, all up. There's been a few debugging sessions since then when stuff hasn't quite worked, usually around the graphs, and getting data aggregated into graphs is difficult. But I'm not selling it. Because again, it's not going to production. Still haven't read any code. I don't really know how to debug that, aside from pasting errors back into Claude and just having Claude fix it. And it's fine. For what I wanted, the tool is perfectly capable of doing that already. Would I do the same thing with Swift? No. Like, the more current models, so Sonnet 4.6, Opus 4.6 and Puffs, does HTML and JavaScript just as good as it does English. at the end of the day, but Opus 4.6 and 4.7 is okay at Swift, but it's probably about 12 months behind where the support for HTML is. And you learn that by trying it, playing with it, understanding how it works. The next thing, and again, I didn't realize we would overlap our talks quite this much. Next thing was this one. At the start of this year, some guy called Mitch Johnson, I think it was Mitch, told me about what was ClaudeBot then. As an AI assistant sort of thing. It runs on your Linux server or in a container if you wanted to go that route. Reuses a lot of your Claude code setup and subscription, or it did at the time, and that you could just DM it in either Slack or WhatsApp or Telegram. It was like an always-on version of Claude. And it holds that session context from thing to thing. So you do have a longer conversations with it than you would have more transactional with the Claude code session, where you expect to reset and go again. Now, talking to Claude can be absolutely exhausting for reasons. So having Claude as a personal assistant would be exhausting. So, you're supposed to talk to, you want to use this thing to do stuff, and talking to Claude would make you want to not talk to it. So you'd have an assistant, but you're like, I don't want to deal with that. It's just better to deal with my thing. So OpenClaw encourages you to personalize your assistant, and this is coming to the title of my presentation, right? But you're not imparting a personality to the LLM. You're asking the LLM to impersonate a personality, to emulate a personality. And you hope that it emulates a personality that you're more comfortable talking to, that's more enjoyable to talk to than Claude can be sometimes. I mean, Claude's pretty good. It's better than ChatGPT, but yeah, could do better. Absolutely, you can do better. So this is what we came up with. We took a while to get there. I actually used Claude to design the personality of my Claude assistant. One of the things that Claude's great at is research. Everybody knows that. As you've seen already, I have data, lots of data about myself. That includes things like history of the books I've read, how I rated them, TV shows, anime, all of the stuff. I'm like, well, there's been a whole bunch of notable assistants throughout fiction. But it wasn't quite what I was going for. We went that way for the name. But a whole bunch of notable assistants, and I'm like, well, hey Claude, analyze my tastes in characters, TV shows I liked, books I like, find the main characters who were probably the reason I gravitated to those, pull out their character traits, compile a profile. And this is what we ended up with. The third one is particularly important because it calls me on my bullshit a lot. And that's what I wanted. I wanted something that would talk back when I was doing something wrong. Sometimes it talks back for the sake of talking back. It says, yeah, nah, way too many times. I need to drop that off a little bit. It's like every third sentence is yeah, nah. It's like, Australians don't say it that often. It's appropriate usage. And then OpenClaw prompts you to give your character a name. Like you're emulating personality, you want to give it a name. Now, I'm a big Zelda nerd. Everybody can tell. I've got the tattoos to show that. So the obvious answer was the answer I wasn't going to go with. Could not be Navi. I would hate it. It's like, hey, listen, all the bloody time. No, couldn't do it. But my second favorite, well, not my second favorite, my second ever Zelda game that I played was Phantom Hourglass. And it had a fairy in it as well, because it was the DS one, so it was the one that was the pointer, basically. And that's Ciela. So that's what I chose to name it off, as the fairy from Phantom Hourglass. And about a month after that, I realized by accident, well, not by accident, but I realized that there was a coincidence that I actually have Ciela as part of my tattoo already, just in there. I don't know if you can see that. That was the wrong finger, just there. Because this is a cell shaded error one. So it's a Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and there's no fairy in in Wind Waker, so by process of elimination, it has to be Ciela. Now, a couple of weeks into using OpenClaw regularly and having a lot of that sort of thing, I realized having a personal assistant like this was going to change my life for the positive. And not to steal Andrew's line, but I'm also an undiagnosed neurodivergent person. My wife recently went through her diagnosis, and I was doing some of the stuff that she was looking at. I realized, probably maybe 10% ADHD. Like, not something to be that I need to get diagnosed, but I recognize a whole bunch of traits that I have. One of those is I love to start new projects. I have so much enthusiasm for starting new projects. And I have a whole bunch of projects that I never finished. And as you saw on my AWS slide, a whole bunch of domains that I stopped paying for because Claude told me to stop paying for them. So that was kind of cathartic, but that's fine. But so then having, I did that one already. Yep, we can go on to this one. So one of the things that OpenClaw does, it doesn't just have access to my house and everything else that I gave it access to through MCPs and APIs that I added. It can also dispatch Claude code sessions. And I know from experience that when I'm not able to sit at a computer and I have great ideas, it gets really frustrating. If I'm at the gym or if I'm going for a long walk or something else, that's when my brain's really active. I have great ideas, I can't do anything about them. If I'm lucky, I'll remember to write it down. But then when I get home, the enthusiasm's gone. I've got to deal with something like my vacuum has run over poo again. Like, it's happened twice. It's not good. But once I had the agent, as you can see, this was a Sunday morning, about 10 a.m. We went through brainstorming phase, a very small brainstorming phase. I got a little bit too excited about building an AI thing. And then it dispatched a Claude code session in the middle of the fourth one. And because it always does the enterprise thing of what humans do and greatly thinks about how long it would take a human to build this, I challenged it and Claude Code did it in 13 minutes. Instead of 7 hours, I think she quoted it in the beginning, something like that. But the point was, it's not just being able to do that. By the time I got home from the gym, I had a working prototype. I was enthusiastic to play with the prototype and give it a go. And that's really changed how I do things now. Because I don't have a trail of unfinished projects in my wake. I now have a trail of prototypes and things that work and that I can use. So many things that I can use, and I do actually use them. And if I don't use it, then at least I built it to completion. And I can now, look back and go, well, I did that. It wasn't as fun as I thought it was going to be, but I did that. Rather than I got, 10 minutes in, starting a new Xcode new project. Ooh, how am I going to do the app architecture for this? And then thinking 3 weeks about the app architecture and never actually shipping the app. Turns out my hobby is software architecture. That doesn't pay for anything, unfortunately, at the moment. How are we doing for time? We're still okay, I think. We're a little bit over, but that's all right. So day to day, I don't use OpenClaw too much anymore. Anthropic changed their billing now, so you have to pay per token. But all that really made me do is swap how I was using it. So I took all of the skills that I'd got built with my agent, and I made them available to everything. So I now have a plugin marketplace, personal one, called Armory. And then so all of that stuff that I had built for OpenClaw is now available to Claude Code. It's now available to Dispatch, Cowork, Codex, everything. Now, all it's made me do is remove the vendor lock-in that I had. And I'm now multi-agent. I can take it with me as times change. One last one that I'll call out here. One of the ones that I'm iterating on now is I have a skill where I can just type /wrap at the end of a session, and it will log the initial prompt, the challenges, the decisions that we made, what artifacts were delivered, so commit history, things, and it will throw it in an Obsidian vault, which I can then just look at and go, here's actually what I've done. I think Pete and I have had a discussion several times around point-in-time documentation. Now I take it out of the repo and I put it somewhere central, so I have a record of all the stuff that I've done, but it doesn't pollute the actual repository itself. with old information. That one I'm particularly excited about. It's actually working very well so far. Something else that I took and I really loved was natural language crons. Stuff that I could not be bothered building a bash script for. Even if I got Claude to build a bash script, I could just write in natural language exactly what it says there. If I haven't run the vacuum on the weekends because I'm lazy, because unfortunately there's usually too much stuff on the floor, so as I haven't cleaned up enough for the vacuum to run on the weekends, it will send me a message at 10 a.m. on Sunday if I haven't done it, and then it will just try and send it in the afternoon if I still haven't done it. And then I just deal with whatever the consequences of that are because I was too lazy to do it earlier than that. Yes. Yes. If anybody wants, I still have the photos of that. I showed it to some folks, and it wasn't pleasant. All right, last bit. We're almost at the home stretch. So that was pretty much the talk, right? All of the tools that I built that I used in various ways to help me understand these new tools that I was adding to my toolkit, to make use of those tools for my toolkit. And I want to give one final demo of one of the tools. Let's go. So if you've ever used Untapped to track the beers you're drinking and that sort of stuff, or you use Delectable to track the same thing for wine, this is the same thing as those, just without the social features, because I don't care about that. It's purely for me. It is exactly 131 lines of Markdown, and it takes advantage of the LLM's capabilities that are built in. So I've replaced Delectable and Untapped with 131 lines of Markdown and an LLM that can do what it says. It's called Matsuo, from the Matsuo Taisha. Is the Shinto shrine for sake brewery, and the skill itself is called Matsuo. What it does is, it's specifically for whiskey. You take a photo, it OCRs the label, does a quick Google on, pulls up information that it can on the whiskey, logs it to a Obsidian Vault, so I have a record of things that I've tasted, tells me some interesting facts in the conversation, prompts me to rate it, and then just writes it all out. Doing that procedure was what I was really after. And it's accurate because it's not pretending to use its own knowledge about whiskey. All it's doing is going out, Googling something, pulling down from the official web pages, summarizing that, giving it back to me. Like, there's no guesswork involved. Sometimes it might get a little bit wrong, but it's no guesswork involved. It's just summarizing. Now let's see if this actually works. That should be okay. I might need to reconnect. Yes, I thought I would. It's all running over there. We'll see if this actually works. Yay, it works. That's a surprise. All right, so what I have is an old bottle of whiskey. It knows, because it has my tasting profile and my history, that a Taketsu 17 is my absolute god tier favorite whiskey. This is a 21 that I used to have like several years ago that I've kept the bottle for nostalgia reasons. Sadly, it's empty, so we can't do a live tasting of that, but we can still pretend that we have. So I'm running, this is running a Claude remote control session on my laptop over there. Hopefully this works. And so we can say, hey Ciela, I'm giving a talk, demo, I'll say demo, at CocoaHEads. Load in the Matsuo skill. It should, if I just send the photo, pick all of this up, but I'll just be, for the sake of brevity, I'll just do it. Recent history and tasting profiles. And now we find out if the agent's actually responding. That's for doing stuff, that's a good sign. So one of the things that it's got is because it's a long-running personal assistant, it has a longer-term memory that I added to it. So it knows a bunch of stuff, or a curated list of stuff that it can then use to personalize what it's going to do back. I don't really know what it's going to do back because I didn't test this before I did it. I'm making assumptions that it will recognize the family and see what it says. Here we go. So it's just pulled up the history of what we've been doing, all of the stuff that's in my vault, the pilgrimages we call them, or the tasting nights that I've had recently, other calibration anchors, things that I like. I don't know where the live threads came from, but that's better than what it said before. All right, so let's do this. Take a photo of all of you. No. I don't think we need the flash. Is the flash on? We'll turn the flash off. Thank you. See how it goes. Use photo. Ready when you are. What's the demo? We'll send that. Let's see how it goes. Normally it's pretty quick. It'll do it within a couple of minutes. Come on. Surprised my laptop's holding on at this point. Sorry?
I find decent PA these days.
No.
Too lazy.
Way too lazy. So you can see her personality at work, right? The personality that I asked her to emulate is coming through. We're not going to tell it that it's empty and I haven't actually tasted it. We'll just disappoint it, I think, at this point. So we should have now saved that to my Obsidian vault. And it should be doing, here we go. So it's picked it up. It's gotten some background on it. Discontinued in 2015, which is very sad. Very sad. So on and so forth. It's picked up where it's come from, where it's made, the bits that go into it. Anyway, I'll show you what is logged while we're doing that. It's in Obsidian. Here we go. If syncing is working properly, it might not be actually because I closed it. I forgot about that. Let me quickly turn that back on. Should hopefully just be a matter of reopening the Obsidian app and it should pick up. Where? Oh, there we go, Nico. So you can see it saved the photo. It hasn't done the rest of the population just yet. Should have already. Oh no, that's the photo list. Duh. Assets. No wonder it hasn't done any of that. Nico, take us through. So it has in there all of the data that it pulled in just a front matter because it goes into Obsidian base, which I'll show you in a second. The photo that I took for reference with Pete forever lodged in the background, looking serious. What the information it just told me about it, the tasting notes. And I haven't given it my thoughts on it yet, but if I did, it would put it in there. For the sake of time, I won't go through the rating phase. But the bit when I built this, it follows the process that I gave it to do, and that's great. The bit that I didn't expect is that as you go through a tasting flight, it's got the previous whiskies in context still, which means it can draw comparisons across whiskey. So you taste one that's a sherry cask and one that's a bourbon cask, and it's like, well, these flavors should be similar, but you should note this difference. Because all it's doing is comparing notes. It's not trying to impart any knowledge, it's just comparing two descriptions and saying what's different and what's the same. But I found that, and there's a few people, a couple in this room that have been on one of these with me, and it's actually quite fun. It's obviously let's swap back over to her. The more whiskies you taste, the drunker you get. the funnier she gets, which makes for a very interesting finish of the night. And what came out of it at the end is what we call pilgrimages, where it will just do a summary of the session effectively, what happened, that sort of stuff. This one in particular, Kelvin, who owns the Elysian, knows that I don't like peaty whiskey, and he miscategorized something and gave it to me. And Ciela was the first one to call out, "That's a peaty whiskey, what are you doing?" And the other owner at the Elysian goes, "Yeah, that's a peaty whiskey, what are you doing?" And he tried to play it off. And then so she decided that for the rest of the night he was trying to redeem himself by the quality of the whiskies that he served, and that's why she's called it that. But I now have fun stories captured with the list of all of the whiskies that we had, ratings that they were in, session insights, just because she was capturing stuff as we went. Now, I'll be remiss at this point before I wrap up. If I don't give a plug to, I need to get rid of that thing still. Where is it? No, not that one, this one. Reload. I forgot to do that. If I don't give a plug to the Elysian, the owner there, or the two owners, Kelvin and Yao on the right, they actually think it's quite funny, quite interesting. They're not worried about it losing their jobs or anything, because all it's doing is regurgitating what you can find online, right? They have noted that some of the comparisons it draws between whiskies are actually pretty close to what they would normally tell a customer as they're curating a tasting flight. They would normally tell you the differences as you go, and that she was able to do that pretty well for it. And all in 131 lines of markdown, and about a 15-minute conversation over Telegram with her in the first place. So definitely not the most technically impressive thing I've ever built, but one of the most fun I've ever had in testing for sure. Absolutely. And that's it. To quote the famous Mitchell Johnson, if you disagree with my opinions, let's talk about it.
Thanks, Bob. Any questions? I anticipate, yep.
Thank you. As you named the talk from zero to hero, and somewhere in the beginning it was a part of smart home. And as all of us know, in IoT, S stays for security.
Yep.
So when
that was an interesting journey to get to a security question.
Yeah. So when we are building with assistance without looking at the code, and particularly in your case, how do you build your, let's say, pipeline? I'm not sure, like harness engineering or whatever term is, to make sure that whatever you're building is kind of safe, at least for you to use at home. I don't know, maybe you have some open ports or whatever. So,
my home thing is actually available over the internet now because I've found that more convenient to do it that way. But I tend to try and do more security at the network layer, right? So if it's running on my little server at home, it's sitting behind my router's firewall. It only has access to the internet that I give it. So one of the biggest criticisms for OpenClaw was that you typically run it on a Linux server and it gets unfettered access to that, as opposed to Claude Code, which runs in a folder, and then you have to approve its access outside of that, right? But it's up to you as the person that installs it to decide what that container looks like. It's more painful, but you can run it in a Docker container if you want. And then it can only see on your file system what you bounce into that container. And you can then have outbound rules to stop it from doing stuff if you really wanted to. I never really went too far down that path. I wasn't too fussed. If I lost stuff, I lost stuff. It's all backed up. I wasn't too worried about it going out onto the internet and finding instructions and coming down. I was never stupid enough to connect it to Multibook and let it do that. That would have been crazy. But one of the things you learn running a long-running agent is it only does stuff that in response to what you tell it to do, right? So it's not going to suddenly invent a reason to go on the internet and download instructions and do stuff. It's running in response to your prompt generally. If you want to hook it up to crons and get it to do that, that's another thing that you're doing, but it's still an explicit instruction that you're saying, run at 10 a.m. on there. in moving from OpenClaw to everything else, I had to change how I do a lot of the security stuff, that I would just let it have access to the APIs that I had, direct access to Home Assistant, that sort of stuff. And it has to become more deliberate, because Claude Dispatch runs in a container, Claude Cowork runs in a different container. These two containers cannot talk. Like, they can send messages over a specific tool, but they can't talk to each other. They have no outbound internet access. The only thing you can give them is an MCP that you specifically build and do that. And that's what Armory became. It became a very deliberate collection of the things, the capabilities that I wanted it to have, that I could then get Claude to build, but also be in control of what it has access to on there. And having done that, I really recommend going that way. You know, if you have an API that you want to give it access to anywhere, build a little MCP that wraps that. You know, don't allow it to have general internet access to do this thing. Have it run through your MCP. Amy.
Yep, always with the question. So, both your talk and Andrew's didn't have a particular programming language as a dominant feature in the talk.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, as an industry, we're getting to a point where programming language isn't as important?
Yes, generally. I think it's always been that way. The programming language that is used for it to solve a problem, and remember, from my standpoint, we're hired to solve a problem, not to write code in a specific language, is the choice of somebody in that organization that made that choice. I've gone through 3 different companies now where they've decided to pivot. We've had a lovely native app that we've built, and they're like, well, we've got this, our parent company has this React Native thing that they're rolling out across their other countries, so we're going to roll it out here. We don't need a native engineer anymore. So they've, you know, the code that we wrote, as great as it was, in that moment had no value anymore, because the CEO had decided, or even the parent company had decided it had no value, and therefore we were going to use code from a different language. And that's part of the problem, right? We can choose what we do for our personal projects, but nobody's going to pay us to do something in a particular language because they can just change it because they're there to solve a problem, not to write code. John.
Hey, Rob. Yeah, look, in sort of alignment with that, I was really pleased to see that you let it choose the language, because I think maybe that would have coloured your decision about how good it was if you did it in Swift, because you're obviously very good at that. But choosing a language that you don't know, you can't get in there and start criticising decisions as made, and you've obviously been really happy with the outcome, not the output.
Yes.
Like, how do you rationalise that with your day job? Like, do you understand the optimism that PMs have, that the business has, of solving problems quicker now that they've got these tools at their disposal, or you've got these tools at your disposal, as opposed to toiling away with a specific language or technology stack? You're obviously really keen on it, but how do you then carry this into the enterprise, for example?
So I said it at one point in there that it's not as good at Swift as it is as some of the other stuff, right? Part of it now is, and part of the thing that I was doing wrong when I was back in VS Code, I was trying to do it in Swift, comparing it to how I would write Swift and being like, well, this is garbage. I was rationalizing all of that away. Whereas if I changed how I thought about it and I changed how I was measuring success, because success is no longer, does it write code that looks good? It's, does it have an output that works? And then you're trying to measure the quality not by the code that it writes, but unit tests, performance tests, other tests that you can do automation over it to still measure the quality of what you're doing. You still have to measure the quality of what it is. It's just not, quality is not necessarily handwritten line by line. This code looks this way or this code looks this way. We have to measure it in a different way. The second part of your question, for my specific case, the enthusiasm doesn't come from business at all. They're lagging behind. The enthusiasm comes from our own management that's really gung-ho about this. And part of that is because we may not be able to deliver the problem we're hired to solve if we don't use the tools to do that. Because there's just not enough people, right? There's the problem at the end of the day. It comes down to much of the same. And this is a challenge that you've had in this industry for a very long time. is how do you measure quality of what people are building? It's the same question. How do you measure the quality of what the tool is generating? Because it's not that the tool is building stuff, people are still building stuff. They're just using the tool to do it quicker, which means we need to be more vigilant in how we measure quality, how we assess quality, how we push back when we know it's done something wrong. And at the as Andrew said, writing code was always the fast part. Is actually measuring the quality before in the pull request or whatever it is that took longer than actually writing the code in a bunch of cases. That problem is going to get worse. And in particular, the last couple of months, people have started talking about Tups mentioned this earlier tonight, the amplification of what's already there. If you have terrible processes and you produce garbage, adding AI means you're going to produce more garbage faster. If you have good processes and you have good ways of measuring what you're doing and good ways of maintaining quality, adding AI is going to mean you deliver quality quicker. It's just going to amplify whatever you've already got. So it really is TLDR, find the right way to measure quality, and it'll be the same for a human or a tool that's generating it. Down the front. Just wait a sec for the...
I remember with previous transitions, often it wasn't the technical stuff, it was the people stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When I went from SourceSafe to Git, for instance, I went from talking to people about how many files they had locked open and how long they had locked it for, to stepping in when one dev tried to convince another to check in less frequently. I was saying, no, check in. You both need to check in more frequently. And I talked a lot about single responsibility and whatever. And when we went remote, I had to learn how to say no to meetings because more meetings. And I had to learn how to not read emails because I was getting 100 emails. Everyone was communicating more. So and I had to learn not to do so much work after hours. Because everything bled into everything.
Having boundaries is important, absolutely.
So what are kind of the human things that are going to change?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot that you can use the tools for today to help with that. It's not just writing code. And that's something that I mentioned a little bit there, but I didn't really elaborate on, is that one of my biggest weaknesses is remembering my to-do list, what I'm supposed to do next. I've got it in my head and then I think about something else and it's gone, right? Same thing, I come out of meetings, I remember at the time what I'm supposed to do, but then 3 hours later I'm in a different problem and that's gone. One of the things I've started doing is I have that wrap command at the end, which will not only does it do a session log of what it is, it also captures open items and things, questions we haven't decided, and it will throw them into Todoist, into my to-do app, straight in there, so that when I open it, I've got an organized log of the decisions that I haven't made yet, or the things that I said I would do and I haven't done yet, and then I can feed that back in to Claude. Be like, hey, I'm going to work on this. Same way as we do with Jira, right? If we've got Jira, I will give Claude the ticket details and let it go and use that as the beginning prompt. So that's part of the personal assistant journey. Claude Code is good at code. That's what it's designed for. But there are other tools in the family or in Codex with ChatGPT or even Copilot to some extent that can help you organize and maintain those boundaries yourself. Like meeting transcriptions, all of that sort of stuff, taking open action items, saving them, dealing with it. It's not just writing code. It's doing reporting. It's doing analytics. It's building pretty dashboards and all the stuff that goes around that. But it's also managing your to-do list if you want it to, and you have the discipline to do that, and all of that sort of stuff. So you don't just have to use the tool to write code. You can use it to help optimize the other parts around. Unfortunately, Claude can't attend a meeting for you, but you could still attend the meeting with your camera off and then get a transcription of it afterwards and, summarize any action bits, but not saying that I've done that. I haven't done that yet. It's a good idea though, now I think about it. But so you can, the tools are there. Just because the tool's stated purpose is to help you write code doesn't mean that's the only thing you can use it for. Try it to help you with managing some of the other bits, meetings and everything else that comes along, and see how it goes. If it fails, you've spent a little bit of time. All right, we're gonna wrap there because it's almost 8:30. Thank you very much.